Chapter 5 of the Autobiography of an Indian Princess. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Val Roth. The Autobiography of an Indian Princess by Maharaja of Cooch Behar, Suniti Devi. Chapter 5. My Marriage. By this time I had become accustomed to talk of my marriage. Often I wondered with mingled fear and pleasure what sort of future was before me. At last the day came when I was to see the Maharaja. As my sister and I waited in my father's room, I remembered she said, "He is very handsome, so I've been told, and very, very clever." When the Maharaja arrived, we were called into the drawing room. I was extremely nervous. It had been trying enough to face Mr. Dalton, but I felt more nervous now that the really critical moment had come. We sat round a big table in the drawing room. Mr. Kneller came in with the Maharaja. They both talked to us for a time. I was so shy I did not know which was the Maharaja and which Mr. Kneller. Presently a man most gorgeously dressed came into the room. He brought something which was placed on the table. After a few minutes my father said, "Suniti, this is a present from the Maharaja to you." I looked up, and as I did so I met the Maharaja's eyes fixed on me full of love, and I blushed. From that moment my future husband and I loved each other. He was so handsome and so charming. He told me afterwards that he had brought the present in his carriage, but wished to see me first, and if he liked me he would offer it, and it would be a token of his love. We met several times later, but always in the presence of others, yet I knew the Maharaja loved me. Notwithstanding our hopes that everything would go smoothly with the preparations, there were constant worries concerning the religious rites. After some weeks, when many messages had passed between the government, the state, and my father, my sister told me that there was a hitch about the marriage, because the state people would not hear of a Brahmo alliance. I answered, "One thing is certain, I shall not change my religion. Yet, Bino, I love the Maharaja and will marry no one else." More correspondence followed, and at last the priests of Cooch Behar came to our house and promised my father that the marriage should be arranged as he wished. This was the one thing needful. My father had come to have an affection for the Maharaja. Indeed, the whole of our family had fallen captive to the Maharaja's charm and kindness. He, on his part, clearly liked them all, and had a deep respect and admiration for my father. How well I remember the delightful ceremony of Girini, which took place when my marriage was at last settled. On this occasion, my fiancé sent saris to all my relations, gave me the most beautiful presents, and distributed more than 100 plates of sweetmeats, etc., to the household. It was a perfect day, one of those on which it is pleasant to look back and forget in its happy memory the sad events of life. But the clouds of hostile criticism had been gathering, and at last the storm broke. For some time questions had been asked as to my father's motives in allowing me to be married before the age stipulated in the act which he had done so much to have passed. My marriage preliminaries were really a stormy time in my life, fulfilling the storm omens at my birth. It is too serious and too long a story to write in this book, but just a few lines may give my readers an idea of what my father had to go through in connection with my betrothal. People who did not have full faith in him and his doctrines raised hundreds of unheard-of questions, but the government was determined on the marriage. My father could have published the correspondence. He could have explained the situation, but serene in the integrity of his motives and in his faith in God, he was undismayed by the attacks which were made upon him. His only real response was, "I became a Brahmo when I heard the divine call, and I have given consent to this marriage by the same divine command. I obey God, not man." As Miss Pigott wrote almost prophetically, "The generation that were the actors have nearly all passed away, and time will have mellowed these events to the aged survivors. But the new generation, viewing the past in the light of history, will not refuse the crown of martyrdom to the sufferings of Keshub, Chandra, Sen. It is in the course of human events that by some tragic incident the truest and best men are brought to the slaughter. Having achieved their end and obtained my father's consent to the marriage, it might have been assumed that the government would have strictly observed their part of the bargain. They had promised to concede everything, and as it was the spiritual side of the ceremony that troubled my father, I think Mr. Dalton ought to have spared him any further worry. There was one person who was very subtle in his opposition and more powerful than any English official. It was the Dewan, the late Kalika Das Dat, Prime Minister. He was not in favor of the marriage because he thought he had been ignored. He was an influential follower of my father's, and yet all the correspondence relating to the marriage went through Jahab Babu, who was only a junior officer. His quiet interference is shown in the following letter written by Mr. Dalton to Mr. Chakrabarti. My dear Jadab Babu, the Dewan tells me that he has already written to you regarding my wire as to the extent of Babu Keshub Gunder Sen's party coming to Cooch Behar for the wedding. Of course, my object is to avoid any unnecessary display of Brahmoism. In marrying a Brahmo girl, the Raja makes a great concession to enlightened ideas, but it is most desirable that this connection should be softened as much as possible in the eyes of his relatives, as Cooch Behar and elsewhere, who are still wedded to the old superstitions, and who would look with horror upon any departure from the old Hindu formula. I wish, therefore, to dissuade Babu Keshub Chandra Sen from bringing with him any of those who might be called his followers, apart from such as are his immediate relatives. In fact, we cannot permit any Brahmo demonstration whatever, and those who come must bear in mind that a single speech in any way whatever relating to theism versus idolatry will not be permitted. So far as possible, not only Hindu customs, but also the ideas and even the prejudices which arise from these customs must be respected. For instance, I disapprove altogether of the idea of bridesmaids, an idea at once novel and repulsive to strict and bigoted Hinduism. The maiden attendants of the bride should remain in the background, and on no account be put prominently forward except when universal custom allows. Also, I would suggest that it is quite unnecessary and undesirable that a large company of ladies should accompany the party. I fail to see what good their presence can do. I think the ladies should be limited to Keshub Babu's immediate family and one or two intimate friends. And as regards the male guests, please remember that the amount of distinction shown to them here will depend entirely on their social status in Calcutta, and that only such as are entitled to be admitted and given a seat at the lieutenant governor's durbars will be considered here. Babu Keshub Chandra Sen is too sensible a man not to understand my reasons for all of this, though of course I cannot expect him to look at the matter from my point of view. It is possible that he may look upon this marriage as the inauguration of a new era in the history of social and religious progress. But in Cooch Behar, at all events, he must wait for the fructification of his work until the Raja attends his majority. Any of the well-known and respected members of the Brahmo community who are Babu Keshub Chandra Sen's personal friends and who would like to come we will receive with great pleasure, and also any of similar rank and position whom he may wish to bring outside of the Brahmo community. I hold you responsible that a list of the intended party is submitted to me at an early date to enable me to provide for a special train, etc., and such list should contain information as to the social status of those composing it. You should telegraph to me the number of the first, second, and third class passengers who will make up the party. It seems to me there can scarcely be more than 20 or 30 at the outside first-class passengers. I have consulted with the commissioner on this subject, and he agreed altogether with my views. Yours sincerely, Godfrey T. Dalton. The final arrangements for our journey to Cooch Behar were left in the hands of Babu Chakrabarti, and at last everything seemed settled, and we left Calcutta on the 25th February, 1878. We were quite a large party, consisting of my father, mother, grandmother, father's sister, his younger brother, his special followers, 2 ladies, wives of missionaries, some relations, and a girlfriend of mine. I was naturally very excited, for this more or less state journey was very different from the journeys to which I had been accustomed. It seemed ages before we reached Cooch Behar, by which time the discomforts of the journey had reduced our spirits to 0. I remember how dark the night seemed. We were directed to the house which had been prepared for us, and all of us were delighted to be in a house again. It was comfortably furnished. Soon after my arrival I asked my sister when I should see the Maharaja, but to my great disappointment I was told I was not to see him until my wedding day. The interval was taken up with elaborate ceremonies. The Dewan and the state officials came to see me. Seated on a carpet, I received them and accepted the coin which tradition demanded they should give, and thanked each by bowing. As I never lifted my eyes, I could not distinguish one from another. The day before the wedding, the Dewan and a few Raj Pandits came to see my father and talked over the ceremony. They told him that parts of it would be according to the old Hindu rites. To this my father refused consent. All these difficulties have been described and explained in books written by missionaries of my father, and I need not repeat them here. The town was beautifully illuminated and decorated. I felt very nervous, though very happy at the thought of seeing my betrothed. When the time drew near, I was sad at the thought of leaving the home that had been such a happy one. To our great surprise, the time appointed for my departure passed, and there was no sign of my going away. Then we heard that the state officials were still discussing the question whether we should be married before the Maharaja left for England or after his return. After a long delay, I was told to get ready. They dressed me in a pretty sari, and I was soon ready to go. My sister Bino and I went in one palki, and my grandmother followed in another. A grand escort from the palace came to fetch me. The time to say goodbye had now come. I touched my father's and mother's feet and said goodbye to the others. I realized I was bidding farewell to my childhood, and that I stood on the threshold of a new life quite different from anything I had ever imagined. The thought frightened me, and I broke into loud sobs. As in a dream, I heard my father's beautiful voice comforting me. His tender words felt like balm on my aching heart. He whispered one short sentence, which gave me strength for my ordeal. I dried my tears. Then, accompanied by my sister and followed by my grandmother, I went to my future home. Never shall I forget that journey through the crowded streets. I could hear the outcry which greeted our palkis. The torches flashed with a weird effect. At last the palkis stopped in the courtyard of the Zenana part of the Cooch Behar Palace. I found myself in the midst of a great crowd of women. I stood, the observed of all, and listened to the various comments on my appearance. I was outwardly calm, but in reality I was a very scared, miserable little girl. Then a lady came forward, bearing lights and flowers. It was the Maharaja's mother, and she was performing Varan, or welcoming the bride. After the Varan, the crowd of women made way for us, and we were taken to a reception room. I was nervous and tired and longing for rest, when suddenly I heard a gentle whistle outside. It was the Maharaja. I knew his whistle well, for I had often heard it at Lily Cottage. I felt at once that I was not forgotten, that in the darkness there was a cheery companion who loved me and wanted my love. I would have answered back in sheer joy, but could not. My sister and I were soon in bed. She immediately fell into the healthy sleep of tired youth. But I was too fatigued and nervous, with 1,001 thoughts worrying me, to be able to sleep. The next morning we were up early. It was my wedding day, and I had to go through a good deal before the ceremony. After my bath, my grandmother was told that a Hindu priest wished to recite the usual prayers. When we came out on the veranda, we saw the Brahmin waiting, surrounded by relations of the Maharaja. Someone put a gold coin into my hand, which I was requested to give to the priest of the Raj family. My grandmother interposed. "No, no," she said, "our girls don't do this." "What nonsense," replied the Maharaja's grandmother. "Why? It means nothing." But we were firm, and I placed the coin on the floor. This was only one of the petty annoyances which occurred during the day. In the evening of the marriage, the Maharaja's mother came and spoke to my mother most harshly. One of her remarks I still remember. "Do you mean to say you love your daughter? How can you when you do not wish her to marry a Maharaja? If she does not marry my son according to Hindu rites, she will not be the Maharani." My mother answered gently but very firmly, "I shall be sorry if my daughter does not marry your son, and I shall take her away from Cooch Behar, but my daughter shall never marry anyone according to Hindu rites." This made the Maharaja's mother furious. While these disputes and discussions were going on in the palace, my dear father must have suffered a great deal silently in his house. There was much hot argument. Both sides were obstinate. Telegrams were dispatched to government. Cooch Behar waited. Sunset came. It was the auspicious hour fixed for the marriage, but no word went forth that it was to take place. Gradually silence reigned. The music and the sound of the conch shells ceased. The voice of the crowd was hushed. All of a sudden everything stopped. The musicians left the platforms, and the town became perfectly quiet. The illuminations were extinguished one by one. Then the unexpected happened, and the Gordian knot of caste and creed was suddenly cut. The news of the final dispute had been conveyed to the Maharaja. When he realized that the religious obstacles might prove insurmountable, he became so strangely quiet and serious that his people felt rather nervous and wondered what their young master would do. He took very strong measures. Looking at those near him with determination in every line of his set young face, the Maharaja said, "Now give good heed to my words. I am going to bed. If I am to marry this girl, wake me up. Otherwise, have my horse in readiness, for I shall ride away from Cooch Behar for good and all tomorrow morning. If I cannot marry this girl, I will marry no one." A great hush fell on those who heard, and there was general consternation. Never before had Nripendra Narayan Bhup so asserted himself. His councillors saw their ruler intended to have his own way. It was now midnight. My father was alone in his quiet house, as one and all had left the palace. His soul was far beyond all earthly things, for he communed with the God who had never forsaken him. I believe that in that solemn hour he found the peace so healing to his soul. Suddenly, the sound of carriage wheels broke the stillness of the night. Steps hurried up the stairs. The door was flung open, and Mr. Dalton, pale and breathless, stood before my father. "Mr. Sen," he cried, "the wedding must and shall take place tonight. The service shall be exactly as you wish. I'll be there to see that it is not interfered with. Come quickly. We've not a moment to lose. There is another auspicious hour at 3 a.m. Let it be then." As he spoke, he handed my father a written agreement confirming his words, and told him that the lieutenant governor had telegraphed, "Let the marriage be performed according to the rites as settled in Calcutta." Mr. Dalton almost dragged my father to the waiting carriage, and followed by some of our friends, they made their way with difficulty through the crowded streets. Then, as in a fairy tale, the scene changed. The stillness was broken by music. The darkness was flooded with light. The whole town was illuminated in an instant. The band played, the conch shells sounded, fireworks were sent up. All was joyous and brilliant. Our wedding was celebrated in an enormous tent. and the crowd remarked that I looked very nice in a pale blue sari with raised gold flowers worked upon it, and a bright red satin veil with masses of gold, the creation of a French dressmaker. But I felt very nervous when, seated on a piece of wood, I was carried between lines of soldiers. The Maharaja followed close behind. He was like a wonderful picture, one mass of gold from head to foot, and the shimmering fabric seemed molded to his fine figure. I went through the ceremony with perfect confidence. The service was performed by Reverend Gaur Govind Roy, who was one of the staunchest missionaries of our church, and all the Maharaja's Hindu priests were also present. It was lovely to think that we belonged to each other from that day, and I was so happy. Certainly never did any girl possess a more perfect husband than the Maharaja. He was so full of tender thought, and he planned most exciting surprises in the shape of lovely gifts for me. But the next few days were very trying. The palace ladies used to threaten and scold me by turns. "You must become a Hindu," was their incessant, wearying refrain, and I was heartily glad when the time came for me to return to Calcutta. My husband had already gone to Darjeeling with Mr. Dalton to interview the commissioner before his departure for England. We left Cooch Behar without regret. Great was my joy and surprise to find that the Maharaja had arranged to join our train and travel part of the way with us. Soon after our arrival in Calcutta, he left for England, and I fell to wondering whether the past few weeks had been a dream or not. End of Chapter 5.